So first question I would do, Paul, is could you please introduce yourself a bit, your background, professional background, and the kind of scope of work you do?
Yeah. Hello. Well, thank you very much. My name is Paul Thompson. I am the founder of LGBT Capital, which is the first specialist LGBT investment company. We do a number of things, but a significant portion of the work that we do is based on diversity, D&I, LGBT rights, and the impact on business and the potential for business in actually doing good in LGBT diversity and LGBT rights.
Why do you think should businesses be, let's say, LGBTQI inclusive?
Thank you very much. I mean, the reason businesses should be LGBTQI inclusive, the first answer I always say to that is it is the right thing to do. And I think we are in a world that is becoming more increasingly inclusive. We believe that significantly more important than that in some ways is the fact that it is a good thing for business. And the reason we say that is that a business that has happy employees is likely to be a better business to work in. You're likely to get a more productive environment as a result of that. And we believe that diversity and inclusion, and particularly within the LGBTI sector, is incredibly important and is an important example of that. And I'll give you some examples. If people can be totally open and feel comfortable with themselves in their work environment, they are likely by default to be more productive. If they are not hiding who they are, they're not spending so much of their energy on thinking, what did I say to this person or what did I say to that person? And therefore can be more comfortable and genuinely focused on work. And we do think there is also a second element to that, and that is the indirect benefit of having an LGBT diverse company, which kind of reflects the communities that our businesses are likely to serve. In that, if we practiced externally what we practice internally, we're more likely to be successful in the LGBT consumer marketplace, which is a significantly big marketplace and actually represents spending power of almost 4 trillion globally. So do the right thing for your employees. You'll get a productive workforce, which will add to the bottom line. But you also have a potential for adding to the bottom line to your businesses by being a brand that people recognize as being LGBTIQ inclusive.
Do you know, for example, for businesses, when we talk about, theory versus practice, how they can be more inclusive, let's say, for on the work floor? What are ways to really implement that? I mean, it's easier said than done, but are there examples? Or?
Yes, I think it's an important point to talk about, which is actually developing LGBT diversity in practice and not just talking about it. Because if you simply say we are an LGBT friendly company or we are an LGBT diverse company, you only go so far along the path, and particularly with the younger generations are increasingly demanding that their employers respect them and give them a workplace which is comfortable. So the kind of things that companies can be doing is, first of all, making it very clear to all employees, including LGBT employees, that they can be themselves in the office. And we believe that, importantly, this starts with senior management, because if senior management give that message, then it will follow through the company. We believe that things like creating LGBT employee networks give employees something that they can look at and say, yes, this is real. It gives employees an opportunity to meet and mingle with other LGBT employees. And it also means that that network can then feed back to the company practical things that it can be doing. Another example, which I think is an important example as Thailand looks at having civil partnership coming through into Thailand, is employee benefits. What benefits do LGBT employees get? Do we get the same employee benefits as all other employees? For example, do we get life cover, health cover, and so on. And we believe this is an important practical thing that not only demonstrates to employees that the company is doing something, but provides something meaningful that the employees can say, this is the company I want to work in.
Apart from companies gaining something, by being inclusive, what do you think there is for employers to win by this inclusiveness as well? I mean, it could be a win-win situation, but why do you think is it important for, let's say, private or corporate sectors to talk about inclusion?
We believe it's important for the corporate sector to talk about inclusion because it really helps employees understand that they can be themselves. Because it, anybody that's been through that process, and I personally have been through that process, though I have to say that was many years ago, it's a very difficult thing to do. You're worried about, if you will, coming out in the at work because you worry, will I be rejected? Will I not get promotion? Will I potentially be fired by my boss? And these things are, so the more that the company can demonstrate real things to employees, the more employees will feel comfortable. I really believe that a happy LGBT employee who's treated well by their employer is much less likely to leave for another job, with all of the costs that are involved for the company, if they know that that other job may not treat them as well, may not make them feel as comfortable as their existing employer.
I believe you're from the UK, right, Paul?
Yes, I am.
And now you're in Thailand. When you would compare both sides, like East and West, where do you think Thailand steps in when it comes to LGBT inclusion or in society, for example?
I'm from the UK and I was brought up in the UK. And when I was younger, it was impossible for me to consider at the time coming out because I was brought up a time before we had internet where we could actually find out what was going on in the world. When I was born, and I know that I look incredibly young, of course, but when I was born, it was actually illegal to be LGBT in the UK. So I mean, that shows just how quickly things have evolved. And I think each different country has its challenges. I think in Western countries in particular, these aspects and issues are much more openly discussed than in Asia and in particular Thailand. I personally have found Thailand to be a very open, welcoming country. And, I personally love Thailand for that. But I think the issue is not so much that things are not done, but things are not talked about. And if things are not talked about openly, and the various things that I talked about earlier, such as employee networks, senior management coming out in support, it still becomes difficult for people to be open about being LGBT. And I think there is also an issue with families, particularly in more conservative environments, where because of family issues, people are then less comfortable in actually being open in the workplace.
When we were talking about, let's say, senior management taking on a role, like you had Tim Cooks from Apple stepping out,
Yeah.
outing himself publicly. Do you think, for instance, like HR has also a significant role because they're hiring staff and employees, right?
Yeah, I think you make a very interesting point about examples of senior management and the impact that can have. And you mentioned an example of Tim Cook at Apple. That's important. What I think is just as important and potentially even more important is non-LGBT management coming out in support of LGBT, because it's one thing to look at an LGBT guy like Tim Cook, who is very open, and say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? As a straight or non-LGBT senior management person coming out and supporting LGBT, then you think that's more relative to my company. And that leads into an issue that we do believe is incredibly important, and that is one of allies. In the Western world, there is a real trend to something that is called straight allies, meaning people that are not LGBT, but supporters and demonstrate that we should be accepting and that there is huge value actually in having diverse employees and therefore having LGBT employees.
Do you think that there are opportunities for businesses to be more inclusive? especially now with, let's say, the COVID, everything that is happening right now? Or is it even more difficult now?
Yes, we do definitely believe that there are more opportunities now from being inclusive, and particularly, I'm talking from an LGBT point of view. And I think that's particularly because the younger generation, even the younger non-LGBT generation, believe that being LGBT inclusive is a positive thing for them when making a decision on a brand, whether that's a decision to buy a brand or a decision to be employed by a brand. And therefore, we think that as these younger generations come through, that's becoming increasingly important. And we think that COVID is an important issue. I mean, it's clearly dominated the world stage at the moment. And we believe that there are certainly going to be issues that COVID forces upon the LGBT community, potentially more isolation and more loneliness. And therefore, the value of inclusion at the workplace could be even significantly more than it is. And what we are going to find is that coming out of COVID, as the world does open up, there will be an opportunity for brands to show a new side, to show divergence from old ways of working. And that could very well include demonstration of LGBT inclusion and potentially developing an LGBT-friendly brand to get the business benefit from that.
You are operating in Asia. I saw even China or Hong Kong. Now you're in Thailand. What are your impressions about, let's say, Thailand for SMEs and inclusion? Is there a bit of progress there or a small change happening in the Thai corporate world?
Yeah, I think what we've tended to see in terms of the diversity element coming out is that the vocal companies tend to be the more multinational companies. So, for example, when we look, our business is based actually in the UK, and we review companies from the UK, but when we look at businesses who are based in the Western world, they review a corporation's LGBT credentials based on not only what do they do in their domestic market, but do they show the same example in international markets, i.e. you don't just do it where you have to, it becomes a part of your total company culture. And we've actually seen that has begun to trickle down to more local companies. And we held a session, an initial session last year with Appcom where that was the case. I actually think that looking forward, the civil partnership that's coming into Thailand will be a real driver for companies thinking about these issues, because the issue of same-sex couples being able to get civil partnered, which equates to a marriage, will bring in issues that companies really do need to think about and HR staff need to think about going forward.
Do you think, let's say, a foundation or similar organizations like Appcom do have an impact or significant role in, aligning together with, let's say, non-LGBT fields? Do you think their role is highly significant in engaging in this topic?
We're a great supporter of the work that Appcom does, and I think one of the benefits that Appcom have is that it has a regional role, and we think there is real potential regionally for companies to support each other, help each other on the LGBT road. And one of the things that we found all over the world is that somehow LGBT diversity firms break down the competitive aspects and work together to help each other, because ultimately it's in the interest of the LGBT community and so on for that to happen. So we believe that Appcom plays a unique role. We also believe that because of Appcom's great contacts and working with various organizations within Thailand, that it's very well placed to support this type of work.
So as a conclusion, I guess we can agree that there's still work to do, that we're not there yet, and there's still, we're still in progress. Do you agree, even in Thailand, to work with?
In conclusion, there is a significant amount of work to be done. And I have been lucky over recent years to be involved in work in the US and Europe and the UK, and I've seen the huge amount of progress that has been made in a relatively short period of time. And I think we have the opportunity to see that in Thailand. And as I mentioned in an earlier question, I think the issue of the civil partnership being introduced will be a wonderful catalyst for that moving forward at a pace.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That was great.
Okay.